All right, welcome back to College Football Addiction. It's a Friday night, and I am pretty against doing videos on Friday nights for a couple of different reasons. One, people are out doing stuff. Two, they just don't get views because of number one. And three, I try to really just take family time and kind of log out for the week. But I did go to a theme park all day today, so a little bit of work, I guess, is not too big of a deal. We got huge news on what the future of conference championships could look like going forward. It was put out today by Pete Nakos of On3, what we might see going forward. And let me just tell you, the options are not great, but obviously something has to be done where you've got conference championships that are just losing relevance, right? SEC fans, Big Ten fans, you probably still want to win the conference. I know Clemson fans were happy with winning their conference this year. But man, Clemson sneaks into the ACC because of the auto bid. They are into the playoff because of the auto bid. They probably didn't really deserve to be in the playoff. Now they took care of business. They did what they needed to do. I get that. The SEC champion gets a tougher road than the SEC loser. The Big Ten champion gets a tougher road than the Big Ten loser. So obviously, they feel like something needs to be fixed, and they also need to figure out, well, who is going to the playoffs in 2026 when all of this stuff gets shifted around? The answers are terrible. Now, are they better than what we have now? Should we just do away with conference championships? In my opinion, probably. The meaning is less now than ever, but shoot, the meaning of the regular season is less now than ever. And we'll talk about that in a moment too, but here's what we're proposing. According to Pete Nakos of On3, the Big Ten has toyed with the idea of reinventing championship weekend into a small tournament where the top two teams play for a conference title, while 3 plays 6 and 4 meets 5. Automatic bids could be on the line if they become part of the future college football playoff, which is what we expect, right? We expect the SEC and the Big Ten to come away with probably 4 auto bids. The SEC, this is where it gets kind of crazy. They're considering 2 different things. One, a model that looks very similar to what I just told you about the Big Ten. 1 and 2 play each other for your championship. 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5 is an idea that's been thrown around. But this second option for the SEC is absolute lunacy. And hopefully, this is not something we ever see. Because you think the regular season means less now. And I know there's a debate about that one way or the other. I did a video on how the regular season at the same time meant more and less right now than it ever has. And both sides of that argument are actually correct. I'll talk about it very briefly, and then I'll link that video at the end. But sources have confirmed to On3 that the SEC has also had preliminary discussions about the possibility of 4 play-in games. You heard that right. 4 play-in games. This is like the first 4, and I know they're considering expanding March Madness too, but this is like the first 4 in basketball, but for football. However, it totally devalues the regular season as number 1 would play number 8, 4 versus 5, 2 versus 7, 3 versus 6. It's the most expansive conference championship weekend discussed to date. This play-in format would work best if the SEC had 4 automatic bids, which we expect them to get, which remains a discussion point. Okay, let's unpack that. So that first one that we talked about, where the SEC and the Big Ten are basically doing the thing, here's what that would look like, right? Oregon and Penn State were 1 and 2. This is last year's, seeding so that you can kind of get an idea. I'm good with that. The winner of that is your champion, and then your 3, 4, 5, and 6 get their chance to get in. Now, what would have happened there? Well, Indiana would have played Iowa. So Indiana would have played their toughest game of the season outside of that Ohio State game. They would have played their toughest game of the season to earn their way in. Maybe that's not the worst part of this. Ohio State would have played Illinois. Illinois, a team that was trending up a ton, got a bunch of wins that were kind of unexpected this year. Didn't have a super tough schedule, but then beat South Carolina in the bowl game as well. Not that we put a bunch of stock into the bowl game, but that's kind of an interesting thought there. In the other side, Texas and Georgia play for the SEC championship. Tennessee, South Carolina would have been a fun matchup. South Carolina one of the hotter teams. Tennessee, a team that it's hard to judge. Their schedule was one of the easier ones in the SEC. And then you have Alabama, LSU, a rematch that we actually saw that I'll talk about here in just a moment. To me, this is the better option, right? If you're thinking about 2, the Big Ten, fortunately, is like, this is probably what we're doing, right? The SEC considering this option, which is what the SEC should do. This Sankey, like, call it quits. Don't think about the other option and just go with this. Here's what the SEC's other option would look like. Texas would play Ole Miss, okay? Alabama would play LSU. I'll just tell you, now, this wouldn't be every year, but I absolutely hate this idea because we just saw this blowout a few weeks earlier, and then after that, LSU lost to UF. UGA would play A&M. Again, that's a 4-loss A&M team that I don't really think had any business getting into the playoff. And then Tennessee, South Carolina. Again, that matchup would be really fun. I think that one would be pretty interesting to see. Here's the big problem. Why do A&M and Ole Miss deserve the opportunity to go out and play for a national championship? Right? Those would be my big questions. Right? Teams with multiple losses, multiple bad losses. Why are we saying that those teams need a chance to go and play for a championship? Well, TJ, it's the SEC. Every week is a battle, right? It's so tough, and you don't understand because this team in the ACC would have done this, or I don't care about any of that. If you put an Ole Miss team against a Texas team that finished number 1 in the conference, and Ole Miss just has a good day, and Texas has an off day, an Ole Miss team that did not deserve at all, did not have any reason to be considered for the playoff, and certainly not considered for the national championship, why would we undo everything that Texas did during the regular season on a one-off? And that's what this would be. Texas, you had a great season. You did a great job your first year in the SEC. Congratulations. Everything you just worked for can be undone in 60 minutes. I don't think it makes any sense. Same thing later on down, right? With number 2 UGA against A&M. UGA went into Bama and lost, and then lost on the road at Ole Miss. I get that. A&M would be coming in with 4 losses, 3 in conference. Why do they deserve a chance to go to the playoff? This makes no sense to me, and it absolutely continues to devalue the regular season. The SEC, listen, I get it, and I understand there's a lot of SEC haters that watch this, but you guys all know, as much as you hate the SEC and you hate ESPN shoving down your throat, there is a great SEC matchup like every week. Every week, you can turn your TV on and you can say, yeah, I'm tuning into that. That doesn't necessarily happen every week in the ACC. That doesn't necessarily happen every week in the Big Ten even. In the Big 12, there are a lot of fun ones because there's so much parity in that league. I will give them some credit there. The SEC has the best regular season in all of college football. Listen, I'm not telling you they're the best conference anymore. I'm not smoking the SEC's pipe right now. I'm not doing any of that. But we would completely sacrifice that. A team could be undefeated in conference and get the 1 seed and play a team with 4 or 5 losses in the regular season. And maybe an injury happens. Maybe it's just not their day. Maybe it's a bad matchup. And we're taking that team. We're taking that undefeated team or that 1-loss team. We're taking them out of the college football playoff. We're devaluing their entire regular season's worth of work because of a one-off. Now, I hear what you're saying. All they got to do is go out and take care of business. All they got to do is just win that one game against that 8 seed. It wouldn't be a big deal. I agree, but all they had to do was take care of business the whole season, and you guys just threw it away by having a 1 versus 8 matchup that could go the wrong way. Again, I have stood on this mountaintop, and I have continued to cry and whine and moan about this, but I am tired of the regular season being devalued over and over and over and over again. And if the SEC does this, they will have gone from the best conference when it comes to week in and week out matchups. In-conference matchups with the SEC have always been phenomenal. Shoot, Oklahoma-Auburn was 2 terrible teams this year, and everyone was tuned in. We will completely throw that away if we go to this 8-team model that the SEC is considering. How about the ACC? This is an interesting one that I think is kind of fun or interesting to look at. Let's talk about them in just a minute. If you're watching this, I don't ask for this on every video. If you'll do me a favor and hit the subscribe button, we've certainly seen a lot of good growth over the last 13 months that we've been doing the channel. We'd like to continue that. So whether you agree, disagree, I don't care. Here for the comments. Make sure that you are subscribed to College Football Addiction. We got a live show coming up on Wednesday, The Power 2. at Wednesday at noon Eastern if you'd like to check that out. Cole Phillips, myself, and Tom Hannafin will be chatting all things college football. Jim Phillips has floated the idea that the 1 seed in the ACC is just the champion. They don't play on conference championship weekend, and then 2 and 3 play for a spot in the playoff. Listen, I'm not one that's going to give the SEC or the ACC a lot of love. I'm not one that is here to pat the ACC on the back. And obviously the ACC has less teams, and so they've got to come up with a more unique model than maybe the Big Ten or the SEC. But out of all these options, I can't believe I'm going to say this, the ACCs might be my favorite. The idea of what you do in the regular season in the ACC actually matters. And I know what you guys are going to say. The ACC sucks. The ACC is not a tough league to win. The ACC is a terrible conference. I get all that. I get it. I'm not disagreeing with you. It is much easier to win the ACC than it is to win the SEC or Big Ten. You're completely right. But if the ACC does this, what they're doing is they're saying our regular season matters. We are not throwing it away. We are not giving our 1 seed, our best chance to win in the playoff. We are not going to devalue what they did through the regular season at all. And guess what? I kind of like that. And then I like the idea of 2 and 3 playing for a spot in the playoff. How it would have worked out last year, SMU would have been in automatically. They would have been crowned the ACC champion because of what they did during the regular season. And then a Clemson team that was up and down and a Miami team that faltered late would have battled it out for a trip to go to the playoff. Listen, I don't hate that. Could you imagine us getting to see Clemson and Miami in a winner-take-all, a winner goes to the playoff game? Listen, that's not terrible to me. I kind of like the idea of what you do in the regular season matters. And then if you're that 2-3 that didn't get in on a tiebreaker, you get a chance. The other one that the ACC is throwing around, and I don't love this for obvious reasons, but the other one the ACC is throwing around, not quite as bad as that 8-team SEC model, but the ACC would have 4 teams play. They'd have 1 and 4 play on the last weekend of the regular season, and then they'd have 2 and 3 play on that same weekend. The winners would play each other the next week, conference championship weekend, in Charlotte. It's kind of close to that SEC model, just less teams because you have less auto bids proposed. 1 could lose to 4. 2 could lose to 3 for sure. And you might have a 3 versus 4 matchup in Charlotte. But with less powers in the ACC, that would be less likely in my opinion. However, it's not the worst thing I've heard, right? I like the ACC's first model the best. This one's just okay to me. Now, there's some obvious questions that come in with that. There are some pretty big games that happened that last weekend of the regular season. Florida State, Clemson versus South Carolina, Louisville versus Kentucky, and then obviously Georgia happened as well. I don't know that Georgia Tech is ready quite yet to compete for the ACC. Don't come at me, Yellow Jackets fans. I understand that you are a program on the rise. They'd have to do something with that. Those games would have to get moved if that was the case. And I think ultimately the rivalry weekend will get moved to earlier in the season. I don't know, that's a year away, 2 years away, whatever. But I think that will eventually happen. But they'd have to fix some things to ever have that one come into play for the ACC. Now, I've said this, and I've said it on other shows, I've said it other places. I'm actually a bigger fan of the regular season than anything else. I actually like that baseball and basketball crown a regular season champion. I'm really good with that. I like the regular season. I like college football. I watch from week 0 until the national championship, and I watch as much of it as I can. The regular season means something to me. And though the powers that be are devaluing that with every single turn, I kind of like the idea of crowning a regular season champion. Now, why didn't they in the past? Why did we invent championship games? Well, number one, for money, right? That is clearly why we added championship games to these leagues. But number 2, because usually 1 and 2 in a conference were very close. It was a good matchup, right? Not a 1 versus 8 or a 1 versus 4 type situation where you've got to play in to possibly get to the conference championship or to win your conference championship or to make it into a playoff. We had championship games that meant something there because you had 2 pretty equal teams playing each other for the right to be either a champion or to move on to the playoff. I still value that. But the regular season right now has never meant less for the national championship. I talked about this earlier. You could also say it's never meant more for the playoff. And I think both sides are right. But the regular season right now doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot for the Natty. It means a ton for getting to the playoff. More games mean something for getting to the playoff. But let's not pretend that every team that makes the playoff has an equal shot to win this thing. We understand that the teams with more talent are probably going to win over a 4-game stretch. Just because Boise State got to make it in or SMU got to make it in as the last at large doesn't necessarily mean that they're about to go win the thing. You think about other leagues, right? The MLB, the NHL, and the NBA, where their regular seasons are virtually meaningless. You can turn on baseball in late September and have a great feel for what's about to happen. You can turn on the NHL in April when the playoffs start and be completely fine. They put more teams in the playoff than they have. They put more than half their teams in the playoff. And the same with the NBA. Nobody watches those. Their ratings are terrible for the MLB, NHL, and NBA in the regular season. But where are their ratings good? In the playoffs. And what I think is going to happen as we continue down this road is that we are going to do the same thing in college football. Eventually, we are not going to care about the regular season. You already kind of see it with the scheduling agreement that's been proposed. Oh, Big Ten and SEC matchups early in the year, that'd be amazing. That'd be great. I'd love seeing Ohio State, Alabama play in Tuscaloosa. I'd love seeing Michigan and Georgia playing up in the Big House. That'd be awesome. What do they matter if your conference records are all that people are considering these days? They don't mean anything. They're glorified preseason games. Now, they're exciting because we haven't had football in 8 months, but they don't mean a hill of beans. There's this idea of, TJ, what about more games are better, aren't they? Isn't it better to have more football than less football? Like, why do you just hate sports? Why do you hate the game? And listen, that's not what I'm telling you. But how did we just have a national championship between Ohio State? I've got the trophy sitting up there behind me. How did we have a national championship between Ohio State and Notre Dame and it draw the 3rd worst ratings in the playoff era? The other 2 games, the COVID year, where everybody was worried about their lives, and the TCU-Georgia game, which was over by the end of the first quarter. Those are the only 2 playoff championships that drew less ratings. And you don't think that by screwing this up, by adding more games, it's not going to continue to do that? It absolutely is. Why is that? Why does adding more games reduce the interest? Because there's 75 or 80% of college football teams that have been out of it for over a month. My team didn't make a bowl this year. And so our last game was in the last week of November. The championship was in the second to last weekend of January. 2 months had gone by. The portal window had closed. Coaches had been re-signed or fired or hired or whatever. All of the season was done, even for teams that went to a bowl game. I think about our rivals. Florida, their bowl game was early December. They were out of the college football field. And so the more games we add, the later and later we make this thing, more games is better. I get it. But for interest, the numbers show that it wasn't in year 1. Does it improve? Does it get a little bit better next year? We'll find out in late January. We'll find out on January 25th when the game is played. And don't come at me with the inauguration or MLK Day or anything. Nobody was watching inauguration coverage at 9 p.m. Get the heck out of here. Nobody was out celebrating MLK Day instead of watching the national championship, right? It was just too much to spread out. And so, I don't know. I don't love, excuse me, what we're proposing. I don't love the way that we're doing this, but I do think that we are continuing to overall just continue to devalue the best regular season in sports. And we are turning it into the NBA, the NHL, and the MLB. You're still going to watch next year. I'm still going to watch next year. I'm not telling you that the ratings fall off a cliff next year or anything like that. What I'm telling you is we are heading down a path to where that will eventually be the case. I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments. Am I way off? Is the SEC crazy for their proposal? Do you like the Big Ten model? Again, never thought I'd be the guy here defending the ACC. Do you like the ACC model at all? I think there's pros and cons to everything in life. Only cons to the 8-team 4-play-in option of the SEC, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Again, if you're not already, hit the subscribe button. We have a live show coming up, The Power 2, on Wednesday at noon Eastern. We'd love if you were here and part of that. Cole and Tom, if you don't like me, Cole and Tom are way better than anything I do. I just try and drive the ship and let them roll with things. So make sure that you don't miss that. Give us a shot. The Power 2 on Wednesdays at noon Eastern. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon here on College Football Addiction.